Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brandon Sehlhorst, and I'm the Director of Economic Development for the City of Toledo. Good afternoon to you, and thanks for joining us for today's discussion on the Vibrancy Initiative grant programs. Back in 2021, the City of Toledo launched the Vibrancy Initiative, and this is really our strategic approach to revitalizing our commercial corridors throughout our city. This initiative was born out of talking with local businesses and property owners about the obstacles that they face when renovating historic and commercial buildings throughout our city. And pretty much all of the feedback we received regarding these obstacles came back to one thing, and that was funding. Typically, when renovating these buildings, property owners find themselves with a bad math problem. The cost of doing the improvements based on today's code is so much more than what the rental income can get from that space. And so to address this obstacle, the City of Toledo created the Vibrancy Initiative to help property owners improve the exterior of their buildings while also making the ground floor commercial space of their building tenant ready, which means ideally a tenant could just move in, put up their furniture and fixtures without having to address things such as health code, fire suppression, building code, ADA compliance, things that tend to get really costly when doing renovation projects, especially of historic buildings in our city. The Vibrancy Initiative, the primary goals of this initiative are to create jobs, to reduce blight, and to improve structures and preserve structures in our community. And so when we look at projects to support with these programs, those are the primary objectives. This is the Department of Economic Development, and of course our focus is on job retention, job creation, and capital investment in the City of Toledo. So that is the primary focus of this initiative. This program, as I mentioned, this initiative has been around since 2021. Since that time period, we've invested in over 62 facade and white box grants that have helped 18 existing businesses expand or improve their facilities. These businesses have employed over 335 people in our city. On the new business front, we've helped to attract over 21 new businesses that have helped to create over 150 new jobs for our city. Collectively, these programs have leveraged over $81.5 million of private sector investment. This is the perfect opportunity for the city and the private sector to partner to accomplish collective goals that we have of improving our commercial corridors and activating vacant buildings in our community. We are excited today to announce that we have funding for our 6th year of the Vibrancy Initiative. I want to give a special thank you to Mayor Kapsakevich and Toledo City Council for truly fighting for these programs in this year's budget. This really underscores the importance from them and their constituents of how important these programs are, how we are moving the needle on blight and improving structures in our commercial corridor. So I want to give a special thank you to them for believing in this initiative and continuing to fund it going forward. Today, we've got a great presentation planned for you. We plan to walk through all 4 of the programs. We have 2 new programs to announce to you all today, but we plan to do a deep dive into the programs and answer any and all questions that you may have for the program, the timeline, and any other questions that may come up. I'm pleased to introduce my colleague, Cody Brown, who is the Manager of Development in our department here at the City of Toledo. Cody is the primary point of contact for the Vibrancy Initiative, so you'll be seeing a lot of emails from Cody if you haven't already. He's the point of contact for any questions that you may have with my support and the rest of our department's support. So I'm happy to hand over the presentation to Cody to walk us through today's presentation. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks so much for the introduction, Brandon. I'm really excited to be with you all today and to walk you through our Vibrancy Initiative applications. The Vibrancy Initiative is essentially a collection of different programs that are all aimed at real estate development for properties located in the City of Toledo. The programs include the Facade Improvement Grant, the White Box Grant, and the two new pilot programs that we're launching this year, the Facade Improvement Planning Grant and the White Box Planning Grant. I'm going to go over each of these different programs, and then we'll also go over each of their applications so that you can get an idea of what we're looking for and what exactly needs to be done in order to submit an application to us before our deadline. I'll also note before we get too much further in the presentation that there is a Q&A function that you can find at the bottom of your screen. If you click on that Q&A button, you can enter any questions that you might have, and we will answer them as we go through this presentation. So first, I want to talk about our capital grants. Those are the existing Facade and White Box grant programs that we have available in the Department of Economic Development for this year. The Facade Improvement Grant, a bit of an overview on that. The Facade Improvement Grant helps transform a building's facade. So it reimburses for eligible expenses that are specifically aimed at the redevelopment of the facade of a building. It reimburses 50% of those eligible expenses, and the grants are between $10,000 to $40,000. We also have our White Box grant, which is specifically designed to help bring vacant first floor commercial spaces up to current code, so as to where the Facade Improvement Grant is aimed at the exterior space of a building. This White Box grant is specifically designed to help renovate interior first floor commercial spaces. It reimburses 70% of eligible expenses, eligible interior renovation expenses, and it provides grants of $25,000 to $75,000. So the White Box and Facade grants share a lot of different eligibility and guideline criteria. So I'm going to go through each of the eligibility criteria pieces first and just note where they differ. For both programs, the projects must be complete by December 2nd of 2024 in order to guarantee the availability of funding. For the Facade Improvement Grant specifically, eligible projects must comprehensively address the improvement of a building's facade. And for the White Box grant, projects must comprehensively address necessary code upgrades and result in a certificate of occupancy or completion. So that part is really important. For the White Box grant, the project must result in that certificate of occupancy or completion. That can be documented in an application by providing stamped architectural or engineering drawings, so that we are able to then identify what needs to be done in order to get the space to that certificate of occupancy or completion. It must result in that, or we will not be able to award funding to the project. In terms of eligible applicants, applicants can be businesses, individuals, and nonprofit organizations. All applicants must be in good standing with governmental entities, and applicants must own the building for which they are applying or have the building under contract. Just a note there, we will not be able to award funds until that building is owned by the applicant. Eligible buildings must be located in the city of Toledo. They must have commercial, industrial, or a mixed use and have no active code violation citations. For the Facade grant, a building can only receive one grant in its lifetime, though an applicant can certainly can certainly submit multiple applications if they own multiple buildings that are eligible for the program. And for the White Box grant, a building may not receive more than one grant. It can only receive one grant per commercial space, and those spaces must then be occupied by separate businesses. And here are some of the ineligible buildings for those programs. Ineligible buildings would include exclusively single-family or multifamily residential use, or exclusively storage use. Also ineligible are buildings that contain the following businesses: payday loan businesses, pawn shops, firearms or other weapons dealers, adult entertainment, franchise and chain businesses, and self-storage. I also want to point out the occupancy requirements for both the Facade and White Box grant programs. For the Facade Improvement Grant, this is a new guideline that we instituted this year. but the building must contain a first floor commercial or industrial business or have a committed first floor commercial or industrial tenant. So essentially, the building must be occupied on the first floor commercial space in order to be eligible for this grant, or there could be a committed tenant that can be verified by a signed lease or a commitment letter. For the white box grant, the building must contain a vacant first floor commercial space. So it's critical to point out that the space must be vacant in order for the building to be eligible for the white box grant. For both programs, occupying businesses must be registered with the City of Toledo. And for the white box grant, that would mean that if you have a tenant identified or if you're actively marketing the space for use, that tenant that would go into that space would need to be registered with the city. Eligible expenses. All eligible expenses, they must comply with zoning and building codes in order to be eligible for reimbursement. And any expense incurred prior to the execution of the grant agreement for either program or work performed without required permits is ineligible for reimbursement. Eligible expenses for FIG. I'm going to wait to go over the full list of eligible expenses because we'll see those in the application as we go through it. But here are some things to point out before we do that. For the facade grant, the project must be comprehensive in nature. So that means that it must at least use 2 of the eligible expenses from the eligible expense list. And those eligible expenses, again, they can be found in the application, but also in the notice of funding availability. Another item to point out with facade grant eligible expenses is that roofing expenses are not reimbursable by the grant, but they are eligible to count toward an applicant's match. So when thinking about the facade grant, it's again up to a $40,000 grant, and it's 50% reimbursement. So to be eligible for that full $40,000, there would need to be $80,000 worth of eligible expenses. Again, on the roofing item, the roofing could count towards, in this example, that $40,000 match from the applicant, but we would not be able to directly reimburse for it. So there would then need to be $40,000 of other eligible expenses in order for that to be eligible and to count towards your match. Again, a complete list of these expenses can be found in the NOFA or in Zoom grants. In terms of eligible expenses for the white box grant, eligible expenses address deficiencies in complying with building code, fire code, or accessibility requirements. There's a detailed outline of what these different code upgrades might entail in the NOFA and again on the application. So I highly recommend looking through those and familiarizing yourself with them. If you have any questions as to whether or not an expense is eligible, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're happy to answer any questions you might have on these programs or on the applications themselves. And again, for the white box grant, deficiencies in complying with code must be demonstrated by stamped architectural or engineering drawings. Next, I want to go over the evaluation criteria for each of these programs. We'll start with the facade improvement grant. The first evaluation criteria piece is transformational facade improvement. And I'll note that the max score here is the highest of any of the evaluation criteria for this program. Transformational facade improvement, essentially, we are gauging whether the proposed improvements to the facade are comprehensive and will have a significant positive impact on the aesthetics of the building and on the surrounding area. It's a scale of 1 to 5, weighted 3, again for a max score of 15 points. And here are some examples of how you can demonstrate transformational facade improvement. The first is demonstrating a well thought out vision for the facade improvements and how they're comprehensive in nature. You can identify how the improved facade will catalyze development and benefit the surrounding area. Demonstrate that the project is part of a larger comprehensive redevelopment of the structure and/or surrounding structures. Document how the current facade might not meet modern accessibility standards. document the building's historical significance to the community. Testimonials or letters from neighboring businesses, and photographs or reports demonstrating the current state of disrepair or deterioration to the facade. I highly recommend reading through these and identifying which of these ways you're able to demonstrate that this project is a transformational facade improvement. This is also a good time to point out that each of the applications received for all of these programs will be reviewed by our Incentive Advisory Committee. And then the members of our Incentive Advisory Committee will use these evaluation criteria pieces to assign points to each application. So again, this is this particular criteria piece. I highly recommend thinking about how you can demonstrate to those reviewers that this is a transformational facade improvement project. This particular criteria piece, again, really takes a look at the entire application. So, you know, where it says document or provide testimonials or other items, you can do that in the document section in the application, and I'll show you where that is. And I'll also point out the questions where you can really state your case for this piece. Here's the remainder of the facade improvement grant evaluation criteria. The next piece is historic preservation. It has a weight of 2 and a scoring of 0 to 5. Essentially, we will pull information on the building to determine when it was built, and there will be points awarded depending on what year that falls into. The next piece is neighborhood revitalization strategy area. So essentially a score of 5 will be awarded to any project that's located in a city designated NERSA. If you're in the notice of funding availability, you can click this link and it will pull up a map where you can type in the address of your building to determine if it's in one of those NERSAs. And the final scoring criteria piece is LMI census tract. 5 will be awarded to projects located in a low to moderate income census tract in the city of Toledo. Again, if you click this link, it will take you to a map where you can determine if your project is located in one of those. Both of these pieces are a score of 0 or 5. The NERSA evaluation criteria is weighted 2 for a maximum score of 10, and LMI census tract has a weight of 1 for a maximum score of 5. The maximum possible score for the facade grant is 40 points. For for the white box grant evaluation criteria, a lot of the criteria is very similar, but the first piece is a little bit different. We're looking for project impact. So essentially, the proposed improvements will have a positive impact on the economic strength and vibrancy of the surrounding area. It's scored 1 to 5, the weight of 3, and maximum score of 15. Again, I highly recommend, if you're interested in applying for a white box grant, doing a deep dive into the ways that you can demonstrate project impact for your specific project, and then looking through the application to determine ways that you can illustrate that impact to the reviewers. And again, I will point out as we go through the application where you're able to do that. The next evaluation criteria piece is improved building safety or accessibility. The proposed improvements will improve the fire safety or accessibility of the building. You can see the different scoring criteria pieces here. 0 would be no improvements. 2 points would be fire or accessibility are moderately improved. A 3 would entail fire or accessibility being significantly improved. 4 would be fire and accessibility being moderately improved, and 5 is fire and accessibility both significantly improved. This is a scoring criteria question that we work with our Department of Building Inspection on, and they help us determine whether those improvements are moderate or significant. Here are the remaining evaluation criteria for the white box grant program. This program also utilizes the historic preservation piece, NERSA, and LMI census tract. It does have one additional evaluation criteria compared to the facade grant, which is tenant commitment. So a score of up to 5 a score of 5 will be awarded to those projects that have a tenant secured or an owner who intends to self-occupy the space. The maximum score for the white box grant is 60 points. Okay, next I'll get into our pilot planning grant programs. But first I want to take a look and see if we have any open questions. Okay, Sam asks, if we end up getting a franchise or chain tenant after renovations, what happens to the grant funding? Do we forfeit funding? That's a good question, Sam. So for the facade improvement grant, the tenant there would need to be an active tenant in the space at the time of applying. And for the white box grant, these programs are subject to 2-year period of monitoring and compliance. So essentially, yeah, we would monitor the space for 2 years, and then it may be like I don't know, a case-by-case basis. Essentially, when we're building out these spaces for a white box grant, we are building them so that we can take these vacant spaces and bring them back to productive use. But essentially, you know, when applying for a white box grant, if you don't have that tenant identified yet, they may, I don't know, they may still be eligible. Brandon, do you want to weigh in on this? I don't know if you have thoughts.
Yeah, I would say, you know, our position is, you correctly stated it, Cody, that, you know, obviously if a tenant has expressed an interest that is a franchise or chain in the application, they would be ineligible. However, if a chain or franchise occupies the space after the grant funding has been expended, that, you know, your grant is not subject to forfeit. Because obviously we can't control the market and what happens ultimately with that space. But the goal is to help support local businesses as much as possible with both of these programs. And so that is why we've structured the program that way.
Thanks for that, Brandon. Okay, real fast, if since this video is recorded, will it be made available to us somehow for review? Yes, this will be up on our website on each of these different grant pages, as well as on our Vibrancy Initiative page. It'll be up by tomorrow. Okay, and then Shannon asks, can facade improvement grants be used to repair sidewalks or other exterior concrete? It can only be used to improve sidewalks and concrete that are located on private property. It can't repair sidewalks that are on public property. Okay, and with that, I'll move forward into talking more about our pilot planning grants. We're really, really excited to launch these grants this year. And essentially, how they're built out is they provide funding to conduct planning for either the facade or white box grant that would be required in order to eventually apply for one of these grants. So with the facade improvement planning grant, again, it provides funding to conduct facade condition assessment and conceptual design services for commercial, industrial, or mixed-use buildings. Eligible buildings are located in a neighborhood revitalization strategy area in the city of Toledo. They must also be occupied by a business and have no active code violation citations. So again, this is our pilot year for these programs. We really hope to roll them out citywide next year. But for this year, we're just focusing on these NERSA areas as a way to gauge the program, gauge interest, and hopefully, again, roll that out next year. The deliverables of the facade improvement planning grant include a comprehensive facade condition assessment, conceptual rendering, and a construction estimate. So essentially, these programs will provide a roadmap as to how much it's going to cost in order to undertake these projects. And it will provide rendering and a comprehensive condition assessment so that, again, there's a roadmap there in order to move forward with these redevelopment projects in the future. It's a huge hope of ours that these programs will create a pipeline for both our facade and white box grant. And we intend to, in the future, have some sort of scoring criteria that will help make these projects that go through the planning grant process more competitive in the future. So here's our facade planning grant evaluation criteria. There's only two criteria pieces here. The first is project need. So essentially this evaluation criteria piece is asking that the applicant demonstrate the necessity of conducting this feasibility study for the redevelopment of the space. The scale is 1 to 5, with 1 being the lowest and 5 being the highest. And here's some examples of how project need could be demonstrated. The first is through photographs or reports demonstrating the current state of disrepair or deterioration to the facade, or disinvestment in the corridor in which the business is located. Another way to demonstrate project need is through evidence of structural issues or safety hazards that need to be addressed, documentation on how the current facade might not meet current accessibility standards, testimonials or letters from neighboring businesses, documentation of the building's historical significance to the community, and examples of other historical buildings in the area that have undergone successful facade renovations. So again, a number of these, like the photographs and documentation pieces, they can be documented in an application in the document section. And again, I'll go over which questions as we go through the application itself you can use to demonstrate project need. And then we also have the historic preservation piece. This is the same as it is in the facade and white box grant. It's a maximum score of 10. The maximum possible score for the facade improvement planning grant is 25. Now, the white box planning grant is similar to the facade improvement planning grant. This program provides funding to conduct a comprehensive feasibility study on vacant first floor commercial spaces. Eligible spaces, again, must be located in a NERSA. The deliverables for this program include comprehensive code assessment, floor plans, and a construction estimate. Again, all of this is to create a roadmap and provide pricing estimates on how to move forward with a comprehensive white box development project. So the white box planning grant program has similar evaluation criteria to the facade improvement grant planning program in that it requests, gauges the application's demonstration of project need and the building's historic preservation. It also has a maximum possible score of 25. Now I want to go over timeline for these grants. It's similar on all of them, so we'll just go through one timeline for each of these programs, and I'll note any differences that there might be. So first, the application opens. That happened on Friday, March 15th. The webinar we're hosting today. And then the application submission deadline is April 17th at 11:59 p.m. Complete applications are due in Zoom grants. Again, I'll go over that, but the link to this application and to applications for all of our programs can be found on our Vibrancy Initiative page. And I'll show you where that's located as well. But if you're looking at the notice of funding availability, you can click on the Zoom grants link to take you to those applications. No late application submissions, amendments, or additional applications will be accepted. We will announce awarded projects on Friday, May 17th. And then between Monday, May 20th and Friday, May 31st, we'll hold pre-development meetings. This is true for all of our programs except for the facade improvement grant. But for the white box grant and white box planning grant, as well as the facade improvement planning grant, there will be pre-development meetings where essentially we come out with someone from our Department of Building Inspection to review the space and ensure that the proposed improvements will lead to for the white box grant, that it will lead to a certificate of occupancy or completion, And for the facade improvement planning grant and white box planning grant, essentially just that the buildings are eligible for the project to move forward. The grant agreement deadline, the grant agreement will be required to be signed for everyone who's awarded any of these grants. We will require that those agreements be signed by Friday, June 7th. And then after that, the projects enter the construction phase, which is from Monday, June 10th to Monday, December 2nd. Essentially, the construction phase is where the execution of the project will occur. And then the project completion deadline is Monday, December 2nd. So by that date, Monday, December 2nd, we require that projects are complete. For the white box grant, a certificate of occupancy or certificate of completion would need to be received. And for all of the grant programs, all documents require, for both the facade and white box grant programs, all required documents must be submitted to us by this time. So that would include those certificates of occupancy or completion. Any invoices for expenses incurred would need to be submitted as well as photographs of the completed work. For the planning grants, this deadline is really would really be on the firm that we hire to do the planning work. They'll be done with the plans and estimates by this time. Okay, next we'll do an application walkthrough where we'll take a look at each of these applications and I will show you how to go through them, how to answer them and upload the appropriate documents. So as I mentioned before, all of these applications and notice of funding availability can be found on our Vibrancy Initiative webpage. So the link for that, toledo.oh.gov/business/vibrancy. I'm going to put this in the chat now so that everybody has this link. So you can click on that to learn more about these programs. Clicking Learn More will take you to each of the notices of funding availability, and the Apply Now button will take you to the respective applications. So we'll start by going through our Facade Improvement Grant Program application. I'm going to pull that up now. So I mentioned before, but I'll mention it again now. If you have any difficulties with the Zoom Grants platform or just any questions as you're going through the application, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can find an email address that you can address any questions to within the notice of funding availability. Like I said, we'll be happy to answer any questions that you have, so don't hesitate to reach out. It's taking a second for this application to load, but it should be up shortly. Here we go. Okay, here's the application for the facade improvement grant. You can see that there's 4 different tabs here, each of which will take you to a series of different questions. The first tab is the project site and ownership information. It's very simple. Really, you're just answering basic information about you and your organization. So you'll start out by giving a project name, and you'll see noted here to use the project street address or the building name if it has one that's probably more applicable to downtown buildings. But if your building has a commonly used name, that could be used as a project name as well. So you'd enter that on the right-hand side. Then you'd enter the amount requested, and you'll see the note here that amount requested should be 50% of your total eligible expenses. You can enter that amount requested in this field. Then applicant information, very basic, first, last name, telephone, and email. Organization information. So first you'll record the name of the project site owner of record. And then you'll click on this button here. This is add address. It will essentially geolocate the address to verify the address, and then that information will go in underneath the project site owner of record. Then again, just telephone, fax, and website information optional. And then we request a monitoring and compliance contact. So that's really going to be the individual in the organization who would, answer any follow-up questions that we have. Who should our point of contact be moving forward? That's the name and contact information that we'd like filled out here. I'll also note before we move forward that when you click from the Vibrancy Initiative page on any of these Apply Now buttons for each grant program, it'll bring up a page that looks very similar to this, but it will have, since I'm already logged in, it's not showing, but there will be either a space to log in up here or a space to create a new login, create a new account right around here. So you can create that new account and click the create button, and then you'll be able to move forward with filling out these questions. So next we'll move into the application section for the facade improvement grant. The first section in the application questions is building information. So really we're looking for kind of basic information regarding the building which you're requesting funding for. So we're asking for things like the building address, total square footage of the building, number of tenant businesses located in the building, the name of all of those tenant businesses located in the building, the number of individuals employed within the building, total square footage of vacancy, and if vacancy exists within the building, outline the marketing plan to attract tenants. The next section is building owner information. So really just two questions here. The first is the tax identification number of the building owner of record. And it's important to note that if the site is owned by an organization or business, we're requesting the EIN, employer identification number. And if it's owned by an individual, we're just looking for your social security number here. Next, you'll list all individuals with an ownership interest in the building and indicate their percentage of ownership. So if the building's owned by multiple individuals, or if the business that owns the building is owned by multiple individuals, you'll list their names here along with their percentage of ownership. The next section is project information. So we're requesting a detailed overview of the improvements you intend to make to the facade of the building, total estimated cost of intended facade improvements, and if the facade improvement project is part of a larger redevelopment, you'll detail those improvements here and then give the total cost of intended improvements. Question 14 asks, explain how the proposed improvements are comprehensive in nature and how they will have a significant impact on the aesthetics of the building and the surrounding area, and how the project will result in a transformational facade improvement. So essentially, as I was talking before about the eligibility criteria for the facade improvement grant, specifically that first eligibility piece, that scoring piece, scoring criteria piece for the facade improvement grant talks about transformational facade improvement. So when you're filling this question out, I highly recommend you again take a look at the examples that we give on how you can demonstrate that and really state your case in this question. But I also want to note that that scoring piece does not necessarily just look at this question. It really takes a comprehensive look at the entirety of the project. But this is one place where it kind of most makes sense to state your case and demonstrate how that project is transformational. Question 15 asks to provide a detailed timeline for the project that demonstrates applicant's ability to complete the project by December 2nd, 2024. Here we're looking for a detailed timeline as best as you can give on when the project will begin, how long construction will take, give us dates and milestones. Really the better picture that you can paint for us on the timeline, the more helpful it is for us, and will better communicate your ability to complete the project by that December 2nd date. Question 16 asks, which of the following describes majority building ownership? This question does not impact scoring, but is really just for our internal records and reports. And then lastly, these self-certification statements, applicants should just initial each of these to confirm that they've read them and are following them within their project. The next section is the budget section. And as I stated before, we'll be able to see this full list of eligible expenses here. So these are all of the different expenses that are eligible for our facade improvement grant listed out. So things like building facing materials, windows, doors, all of these would be eligible expenses for the program. We do have a couple of blank spaces over here. If there's anything you need to write in that you think for some reason would still be eligible, but isn't necessarily covered by these, or you just want to be maybe more specific. For the most part, I mean, in most cases, I would say we would prefer that these listed expenses that are eligible be used, but something that could possibly go in here might be like roofing. You could add write in roofing and put that over here. And again, that would only be able to count towards your match for the program. So after you enter all of the expenses that will be incurred during your project, it will total up here. And then it's also important to keep in mind that whatever this total is, 50% of it, 50% of that number is what you want to be reflected in the amount requested in the project site and ownership information section. Also, the amount that's listed here should be equal to or less than the amount of funding that you have for the project. So in the funding sources section, you will list the different funding sources you have, whether that be your own personal funding, maybe a private loan or a loan from one of our partner organizations. You can list all of that here. And again, this number should be equal or greater to the number that's listed here for eligible improvements. Really, we're looking, or sorry, eligible expenses. Really, we're looking to make sure that the applicant has enough funding in order to move forward with this project. And then lastly, we have our document section. You'll see each of our document requests listed on the left-hand side, and all that are required, you'll see marked required. You can upload your documents into this section by clicking the upload button. You want to do that for each one. And then there are some where we have a template available, and you can click on that. It'll download the template and you'll be able to fill it out. So we have applicant's W-9, as well as business tax registration and vendor registration. You can download those templates and then upload the completed templates here. A couple of things to note here. Let's see. For funding sources, those may be demonstrated by commitment letters from lenders or proof of funds from a financial institution. For quotes, you need at least one quote from a qualified contractor for every item that you have listed on the expense table in the budget section. And evidence of first floor occupancy for the facade improvement grant, because again, it is required that those spaces currently have a tenant or have a tenant identified in order to be eligible for the grant. There's an instruction section on each of these sections. It automatically hides, but if you click on the show hide button, it will pull up the instructions. So for evidence of first floor occupancy, those documents may include tenant business lease agreement, a letter of intent from a business to occupy the space that identifies the agreed upon rental rate and term, or a statement of self-occupancy by the building owner, including the name of the business. So that does it for the facade improvement grant. We'll move on to the white box grant application and walk through that. Let me pull that up. We should move through the rest of these a bit faster. There's a lot of similarities between them, but I'll note the differences. Might just take a second for this to load again. Here it is. So again, upon going to the application, you'll want to either log in or create an account on the right-hand side. Project site and ownership information is largely the same here as it is in the facade improvement grant, but the item that I'll point out that is different is the amount requested. Give me 1 second here. Okay, the amount requested, that's going to be 70% of eligible expenses rather than the 50% of eligible expenses that we saw in the facade improvement grant. So going through the application questions, again, starting with the project site and building, it's going to ask largely the same questions as we saw in the facade improvement grant, with the addition of number of first floor vacant commercial spaces within the building. We also ask how long the building has been vacant, square footage of the unit for which the grant was requested, the previous use of the unit, and then if the applicant will not self-occupy the unit, outline the marketing plan to attract tenants. And there's a document request in the document section that goes along with this, where that can be identified. Building owner information, this is very similar to the facade grant. We're asking for tax identification number, all individuals with an ownership interest, previous experience, and what describes the majority building ownership. Then we get into project information. So we asked to provide a detailed overview of the project and the code upgrades you intend to make to the unit, the estimated cost of those upgrades, and if the upgrades are part of a larger redevelopment, provide a detailed overview of the additional improvements you intend to make and the estimated cost of those additional improvements. This is again that project impact piece that we saw in the scoring criteria. Explain how the project will have a positive impact on the economic strength and vibrancy of the surrounding area. You can state your case here and be sure to reference the scoring criteria on how you can demonstrate that. And then again, provide a detailed timeline for the project. The budget section for the White Box Grant program looks a little bit different than it did in the facade grant. Essentially, on the left-hand side, you will describe the expenses for which you're requesting reimbursement from the grant. Then you will indicate whether it's a building code upgrade, fire code upgrade, or ADA upgrade, and the total cost of that expense. Do that for all of the eligible expenses for which you'll be requesting reimbursement. And then this amount, again, should equal, or this amount, 70% of this amount would equal the amount you're requesting on the project site and ownership information page. And this amount, again, should be equal to the funding sources that you're listing in this next table. Okay, and then again, we have a document section. It looks largely the same as the facade improvement grant, with the difference being that the architectural and engineering drawings, renderings, and elevations are a required document to upload, as well as an occupancy plan. And so again, if you click to show or hide the instructions, you'll see that an occupancy plan may include a marketing plan that demonstrates the intention to actively market the renovated space for commercial or industrial use, a letter of intent from a business to occupy the space that identifies the agreed upon rental rate and term, and a statement of self-occupancy by the building owner, including the name of the business. Everything else is largely the same. I will note here, this is in both programs, but I don't think I highlighted it earlier. An entity operating agreement is required for any entity that's applying for this grant, and a board resolution would be required as well. That's required if it's an entity that's not just a sole proprietorship, or if it's an entity with a board, or if it's an entity or building that's owned by multiple individuals, we would need a board resolution authorizing the authority to enter into those agreements, and that can be uploaded here. Everything else in this section is largely the same as it is in the facade improvement grant. Okay, next we'll take a look at the facade improvement planning grant application. We should move pretty quickly through these next two. They are a lot shorter than the facade and white box grant applications. You'll see that they have less sections to fill out. As with these programs, you're not directly, we won't be directly reimbursing the awardee for the facade improvement planning grant or the white box planning grant. We will be essentially hiring a firm to do the planning required, and we'd be paying them directly. All right, so here's the facade improvement planning grant. Again, very similar questions here, except you can note that there is no monetary request because again, we wouldn't be paying the awardee directly. And essentially these grants will provide funding for one project. So there's not necessarily a specific cost associated. We've set aside funds that we believe will be more than enough to provide complete funding for these plans. So essentially the amount that we'll award will be equal to whatever that cost is associated with that planning. Everything else is the same here as it was in the facade and white box applications. And then here are the questions for the facade improvement planning grant. Again, we're just asking building information. This is, I believe, identical to the facade improvement grant application in this section. And then building owner information, project information. This again is where you can state your case as to why your project should be selected. And again, be sure to note the scoring criteria in the notice of funding availability. And lastly, the document section. I don't think that we have anything different here. Yeah, but one thing that I will note is that in the additional information applicant wishes to submit section, this is a good place to take a look at that first scoring criteria piece in each respective application. And in areas where it says that you can document something, this is a place where you could add documents to illustrate any of those points. And finally, I will bring up the white box planning grant application. It's almost identical to this facade improvement grant application, but we'll just take a quick look at it. Okay, again, this is identical to the facade improvement planning grant. This first tab is. And you'll see the questions here are largely the same as well. And again, here's where you can state your case for the project impact piece of this project and the timeline. Oh, no, actually, no, sorry, there's no timeline here. This would just be how the space will impact the surrounding area, and then a detailed explanation of why the feasibility study is needed and why your project should be selected. And then lastly, the document section. Each of these we've went over in previous applications. All right, those are our four open applications for our Vibrancy Initiative. One other thing I'd love to note is that the Vibrancy Initiative does include an additional program, two additional programs that are both related to tax abatement. We've got the commercial and industrial tax abatement program and the residential tax abatement program. I highly recommend taking a look at these programs as well. They can also be found on our Vibrancy Initiative page. Essentially, these programs provide real tax abatement for improvements or new construction. So that's up to 12 to 15 years of tax abatement, maximum of 12 years for renovation costs, for renovation projects, and 15 years for new construction. These programs can be used in conjunction with our other grant programs to save you a significant amount of money in your redevelopment project. So I highly recommend taking a look at those. Applications for those programs are available online as well. We look forward to receiving applications and reviewing them. And I just want to again make clear that at any time during the application process, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us, and we will be happy to answer those. Thank you so much for attending this webinar and for your interest in the 2024 Vibrancy Initiative programs. Have a great rest of your day, and thanks so much.